There are wounds that never bleed, no scars, no noise, no visible break in the skin, and yet they shape the way you think, the way you trust, the way you exist. You look fine, you smile, you grow up, but somewhere deep inside, something remains unsettled, not broken, not fully understood, just quietly altered. Because not all violations are loud, some are invisible, and the most dangerous ones are the ones no one talks about. You think pain comes from what happens to you, but that's not entirely true. Pain comes from what your mind does with it. Two people can experience the same moment, the same touch, the same situation, and yet one forgets, the other carries it for a lifetime. Why? Because your mind is not a mirror, it is a storyteller. It doesn't just record reality, it interprets it, it reshapes it, it gives it meaning. And sometimes that meaning becomes heavier than the event itself. You don't suffer only because something happened. You suffer because your mind keeps asking, what did that mean? Was I safe? Was I protected? Was I alone? And when those questions have no answers, your mind fills the silence with its own truths. Look around. Everyone seems normal. Everyone seems fine. And so, you assume your pain is different. You think, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe this isn't even real. But here's the truth no one tells you. Silence creates isolation, and isolation creates distortion. You begin to compare your invisible pain with other people's visible lives, and you lose, because you are comparing your inside with their outside. And in that comparison, you shrink your own experience. You dismiss it, you bury it, you move on. But your mind doesn't. It remembers what you try to forget, not as a clear memory, but as a feeling, a discomfort you can't explain, a hesitation you can't name, a fear that has no obvious source, and slowly, that silence becomes your identity. Listen carefully. It's not what happens to you, it's what it means to you. That one idea changes everything. A child does not understand boundaries the way an adult does. There is no language, no framework, no clear definition of right and wrong. So the experience doesn't register as a violation, it registers as confusion, and confusion is dangerous, because when the mind cannot label something, it stores it as uncertainty, and uncertainty becomes anxiety. Now imagine two children. One experiences something inappropriate, but feels no fear. The other experiences the same, but senses power, dominance, and helplessness. Same event, different meaning. One moves on, the other carries it, not as memory, but as weight. Because meaning is not in the event, it is in perception, and perception is shaped by fear, power, and silence. The mind does not remember events, it remembers intensity. It remembers how small you felt, how unsafe you felt, how alone you felt. When someone stronger, older, or more powerful crosses a boundary, it is not just the act that leaves a mark, it is the imbalance, the silent realization that you had no control. And that realization echoes through time. It shows up later in your inability to trust, in your hesitation to connect, in your discomfort with closeness. Not because you remember clearly, but because your mind learns something. Safety is uncertain. And once the mind learns that, it never fully forgets. You are taught to fear strangers, but most harm does not come from strangers. It comes from familiarity, from people who are trusted, from spaces that feel safe, from environments where doubt is discouraged. And that's what makes it invisible, because you don't question what you trust. You don't suspect what feels normal. And so, the mind faces a paradox. How can something wrong happen in a place that feels right? To resolve that contradiction, the mind does something dangerous. It minimizes. It's nothing. It didn't mean anything. It's fine. But what you suppress does not disappear. It transforms into patterns, into fears, into reactions you cannot explain. Meaning, control, uncertainty. At some point, the question changes. You stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and you start asking, "What does this mean for me?" And that question is where everything shifts, because life is not just events, it is interpretation, it is meaning, it is the constant negotiation between what happens and what you believe about it. You cannot control everything that happens to you, but you cannot escape the meaning you give it, and that is both your burden and your power. As Raghav reflects in Stones and Thorns, the mind does not suffer reality, it suffers its own interpretation of reality. And once you see that, you realize something unsettling. The real struggle is not outside, it is within the lens through which you see everything. So what if your distress is not just pain? What if it is a signal, not a weakness, not damage, but awareness trying to surface? What if that discomfort, that confusion, that unexplainable weight is your mind asking you to look deeper, not to relive the past, but to understand the meaning you attach to it? Because healing does not come from erasing events, it comes from reinterpreting them, from asking new questions. What did I believe back then? What do I believe now? Is that belief still true? You don't need to fight your mind, you need to understand it, because the same mind that creates suffering also holds the key to clarity. And as Stones and Thorns quietly reminds through the words of Raghav, awareness is not comfort, it is confrontation. So here you are, living your life, carrying things you cannot fully explain, feeling things that don't always make sense. And maybe, for the first time, you are not asking, "What's wrong with me?" but instead, "What story am I telling myself?" Because that story is shaping everything, your fears, your relationships, your sense of safety. And if you can see the story, you can change the meaning. And if you can change the meaning, you can change the weight it carries. So ask yourself, not with fear, not with judgment, but with honesty, what does this mean to me? And do I still want to carry it this way? Because sometimes the deepest healing is not in forgetting the past, but in finally understanding it. If this made you pause, if this made you think, if this made you feel something you couldn't name, then don't ignore it. Write it down, share it, speak about it, because silence is where distortion grows, and awareness is where clarity begins. Like, subscribe, and share, so this conversation reaches someone who is still searching for meaning in their silence.